Everyone, Pastor Nick back here, just about to go out, but I thought I'd record one more question for you here, or one more thing for Nick's question. I changed my hat, so it seems like a new scene, but I literally recorded the last one like 30 seconds ago. But anyway, I hope this helps. Here's the next question. It is a good one and something that you need to pay attention to. It says this: when there are times that we don't listen to God properly, and as a result we miss God's best, then the next option comes in from God. Would that still be God's best? Or would it take a longer time for us to get it? A reroute kind of thing. Do you get what I mean? And the question continues to say, my concept has always been that God always prepares us for God's best. Or God always prepares us for the best, i.e. the gold. And this is what God offers us, but if we don't listen and we don't receive properly, then we missed the gold and instead we get the silver. But along the way, somehow God can turn the silver into the gold. However, it'll take a longer time. That's a great question. I think what it's essentially trying to ask here is, if we don't properly listen to God, will we miss God's best for our lives? And does that mean we'll have to settle? Now, this concept of God's best in our life is a little bit tricky in the scriptures, because although I do believe that God does have a best for us in a certain degree, what that does, if you walk into life with that mentality that God has one best of whatever it is for you, and if you miss that, then you're in big trouble, and you're always living with this idea that you may have missed it. Here, let me give you an example. The best example that I've come up with this concept particularly, and that is this. It's the idea of soulmates. People ask all the time, does God have his best for me out there in the world somewhere? And although that sounds kind of nice, it's not really a scriptural thing. So let's go over here and let's say this is you. Whoops. This is you here. So handsome. And you are happy. This is you. And here you are, and you were told that God has a best for you, this perfect, ideal woman, if you're a guy, of course, perfect, ideal woman, and, your kind of soulmate. And this is her over here. She wears a dress, and she got shoes, because girls like shoes. And she's happy, and let's give her some hair, blonde hair, whatever your thing is. This is her. Okay, soulmate. Now let's say this concept existed, and she is the gold, God's best for your life or whatever. So you go out and you're searching and looking out for her and wondering where she's going to be. Now, let's say this was true, that God did have one best, one soulmate for everybody in the world. Here's a question. If we are not perfect human beings, which we aren't, and let's say over here there's another guy, we're going to make him a little shorter, not as handsome and good looking as you, and he doesn't smile much, but he's over here and he's got funky hair, okay? And he's over here, and for whatever reason, somehow, some way, this guy, little short guy here, right, gets the girl. Now this is your best. This is God's best for you. This is your soulmate, but somehow girl ends up with him. Now you're left alone here. Now that causes one problem because, well, obviously you're sad that you don't have your God's best, your soulmate, the one person that God has set aside for you. But what happens then? If that is in fact the case, then let's say over here, this girl, sorry, I'm kind of making it less pretty here. This girl who was supposed to be with him is no longer with him anymore, so she ends up with someone else over here. And essentially, the whole system gets messed up. If one person doesn't end up being with their soulmate, their God's best, their gold, if you will, then it messes it up for everybody, because it means that I'm going to be with the person that I'm not supposed to be with, and so on and so forth. And so that brings us to this idea of God's best or God's gold. Now, is there, rather in this scenario, for the sake of the metaphor or the example, is it that God has one perfect soulmate, gold medal for you, and everyone else would be a silver and you just have to settle? My answer is absolutely not. God has designed you with particular interests and particular desires and particular destinies that you're moving towards, and has designed many other people with many other desires and destinies. And there are a plethora of people out there who could be a great and a perfect match for you. In other words, there could be 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 100, 1,000 golds for you. And as long as you find the person that you're compatible with and you make the most with and you keep God in the center of and you do the best with that, then that is your goal. See, the point I'm trying to make is that there are many, quote unquote, God's best, if you will. Now, I know that sounds a little bit, if you're not careful in listening to this, it may sound a little off, but the two things are that I believe is that there are many of God's bests for you, if you will. Many people who could, or many situations or circumstances that could eventually be perfect for you or work out just exactly how God has desired or how you desired, in fact, because I believe that the Bible says that God gives you the desires of your hearts, and we have the opportunity to make choices and change our minds sometimes about things and go about things differently sometimes and all this kind of stuff. So we have to kind of get out of this idea or this mindset of that there's only one God's best and that's the only way to do it. And if I don't find that perfect thing because of an opportunity that God has provided for me, then I have to settle and somehow believe that God is going to turn this around. Now, I believe this idea comes from a verse. In fact, let me pull it up here. It's Romans 12. Let me make it big so you can see it here. Romans 12:2. You see it in a bunch of different translations here. Let's read it from King James. Anyways, do not be conformed to the world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, this verse has been the problem or the reason for much misunderstanding about the will of God, because what people go out and do is then they teach that there are three wills of God. There's his good will, his acceptable will, and his perfect will. Let me clear that up for you. There is not three wills of God. There is one will of God. And God's will is good, and it is acceptable, and it is perfect. And so what I'm trying to say with all that is we have to kind of relax and chill out a little and realize that as long as we have a heart for God and we're doing our best to be led by the Spirit, God's will is like a 12-lane highway. And yes, maybe we may swerve a little bit to the left or to the right, or we may not hear or we make a mistake, but that does not take you out of the will of God. In fact, it is my belief that it is extremely difficult to get out of the will of God unless you are willfully and purposefully trying to do so. If you are not, and you've got your mind is renewed with Christ and you're walking in grace, grace is a wide blanket that covers all. And as long as you are in grace, you are in the will of God. God can take any bad situation and turn it around and use it for good. And God can take any experience. So please do not think that if we don't listen to God properly, or we miss the mark, or we make a mistake accidentally, or we don't hear properly, and God has presented an opportunity to us, and we somehow miss it, then we think, oh man, I missed it. What am I going to do now? I just don't know. God, please help me. And we think that we have to settle for God's silver or bronze. Listen, when you are in the grace of God, and you know that He's a loving Father. And yes, you might miss opportunities. Don't get me wrong. There may be opportunities that come and go, but that does not mean that you are missing God's best. God has 1,000 golds for you, 1,000 of His best, that if you just continue to walk in grace and continue loving Him, He will make sure that either one, He'll take a bad situation and turn it into good, like Romans 8:28 says, or your heart and your desires change, or you see something, but regardless, you don't have to worry. You can always walk in God's best and realize that you're not going to miss it as long as you walk according to His Spirit and His will. So I hope that helps. I hope that brings some clarity. Another 10-minute video for you. I hope that's a blessing to you. Have a great one. We'll answer a few more in just a bit, and we'll keep them coming. Keep the questions coming. Thanks so much. Signing out. See you later.